That concludes general questions. Before we move to First Minister's questions, I invite the First Minister to make some remarks to mark the 4th anniversary of the war against Ukraine.
President Officer, Scotland stands for democracy, human rights and the rule of law here at home and around the world. That is why this government will always resolutely condemn Russia's illegal war against Ukraine. Tuesday marked the war's 4th anniversary, and my thoughts go out to everyone who is involved in this conflict from Ukraine and to support Ukrainians everywhere during this difficult time. Since the war began, over 29,000 Ukrainian people have arrived in the United Kingdom, sponsored by an individual in Scotland or the Scottish Government. Over 21,000 of these came through our super sponsor scheme. Many have started to rebuild their lives here, making valuable contributions to our communities. I continue to call for a properly constituted international peace plan, one that respects Ukrainian sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity, one that is agreed by Ukraine and restores peace in Europe. Until that time comes, I say to our Ukrainian friends that they have our support for as long as they need it, that Scotland remains their sanctuary, and if they wish, Scotland remains their home. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, President Officer. 4 years of war. It's impossible for us to imagine. 4 years of fear, misery and death. 4 years of civilians listening for the sound of drones overhead. Ordinary Ukrainians trapped in a state of horror. Hundreds of thousands of ordinary men sent to the front, never to return home. So many statistics, but the cruelest of all, more than 700 children killed. This is a war between good and evil, of freedom, decency and democracy against the dark forces of tyranny. For 4 years, the British people and our military have stood with the people of Ukraine. Our support must remain resolute. I pray that Putin's war will not reach a 5th bloody anniversary, and when it ends, as end it must, that he will pay the price for his crimes.
Thank you. I now call Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is 4 years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I remember when we first spoke in this Parliament, just days after that invasion started. And in our hearts, I believe we all hoped it would be over positively for the people of Ukraine within months. But to think that that tragedy has now continued for 4 years, and the countless lives lost and the absolute horror that the people of Ukraine are having to live by and in. And it's clear where the blame lies. The blame lies with a despotic regime in Russia, with a war criminal in Vladimir Putin, and I cannot wait for the day he has put in front of The Hague and made to pay for his horrendous war crimes. I yesterday had the honour of speaking to the Council General of Ukraine, and I passed on directly my thoughts and love not just to his family but to all Ukrainian families, be they here in Scotland or indeed back in their homes in Ukraine. And I made them a commitment that I know is shared across everyone in this chamber, and that is that we will always stand by the people of Ukraine. They will have our resolute support, and we will not rest until they get to live in the democracy, the peace, justice and freedom they deserve.
Thank you. I call Gillian Mackay.
Today we recognise 4 years of Ukrainians bravely resisting Russia's illegal and immoral aggression. Putin's war has caused immense suffering, displacement and left tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people dead, with civilians paying a heavy price. From the very beginning, this Parliament and the people of Scotland have stood in solidarity with Ukraine and its people. There are families all over our country who have opened their hearts and doors, welcoming Ukrainians into their homes and communities. I'm hugely proud of that unwavering unity that we've shown and that we must continue to show. Particularly with a White House that's threatening to walk away, Scotland and Europe must continue to stand by Ukraine and its people.
Thank you. I call Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, over the Easter recess, Paul Sweeney and I joined Mighty Convoy in delivering 7 ambulances overland to the armed forces of Ukraine for immediate use on their front lines. What struck us both is its proximity. This is just 3 tanks of diesel away. And what also struck us is a country that is trying and succeeding to live as normal a life as possible. There is no rationing. The burrito shacks are still offering happy hour. And then you're given your air attack briefing. And then you see the graves. Around the Greek Orthodox churches of Western Ukraine are cemeteries swollen with the corpses of the glorious defenders. And in central Lviv, there is a gardens, not unlike Princes Street Gardens, which is given over to a war cemetery where flags of the glorious defenders are seen as far as the eye can see. There were 3 funerals there the morning of our arrival. On this 4th anniversary, I am thinking in particular of Sasha, our student guide, who has since been drafted and is now serving on the Eastern Front, and of Father Taras, who we met in the Yavoriv Army Base, who is a veteran of 10 years and never carried a gun but serves on the front line. I asked him, as we were approaching Holy Week, do the soldiers come to your services? He said no. Mostly they just want me to hear their confession because they think they're going to die. They are fighting for all of us, Presiding Officer. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.
The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, President Officer. We are blessed to live in a country which provides its people with the safety net of social security. Any one of us or our loved ones might need a helping hand at some point in our lives. But as politicians, we have a duty to remind ourselves that it is paid for by taxpayers. Already, £1 of every £7 spent by the SNP government is spent on benefits. Does John Swinney think that is fair and affordable?
First Minister.
Yes, I do believe that it is fair and it is affordable. The government successfully passed a budget through Parliament which had the support of members from different persuasions across the Parliament, which puts in place the resources to enable us to provide the type of support that we designed, which we all designed, in the social security legislation when that legislation was passed with unanimity, to ensure that people who required that support were treated with dignity, fairness and respect.
Russell Finlay.
So John Swinney has just said that his benefit spending is fair and affordable. It is neither. Hard-working Scots struggling with the cost of living are already forced to pay £1.8 billion more each year in SNP income tax. That's £1.8 billion more than if they did the same job for the same wage elsewhere in the United Kingdom. And that's the only reason that John Swinney can fund his benefit spending. And it's going to get worse. A new report from the Scottish Fiscal Commission says that 1 million Scots will be in receipt of benefits by the end of the decade. And at the same time, 1 million Scots will be paying income tax at the higher rate of 42 pence or more. So does John Swinney think that is fair and affordable?
First Minister.
I think the government's approach in its budget and in its social security expenditure is fair and affordable. And I think what the government is doing in relation to cost of living support, for example, has a whole variety of different elements about it. It results in people in Scotland paying lower council tax on average than in other parts of the United Kingdom. It results in the abolition of peak rail fares, which means that if you're a commuter between Edinburgh and Glasgow, your travel costs have been halved as a consequence of the government. I hear a Conservative member talking about rural areas. The government is piloting a £2 bus cap fare in the Highlands and Islands, and on my visit to Shetland, it's going down fantastically well as a measure to support the cost of living. And of course, if people live in Scotland, they will also have access to the social contract, which means they don't pay prescription charges, they don't pay for personal care, and also they don't pay for tuition fees, which this week, when the whole issue of student debt in the United Kingdom is becoming such a significant issue, and of course people don't pay tuition fees here in Scotland. So I think the government has got the balance right between asking people to pay on higher incomes to be slightly more in taxation, and of course the majority of taxpayers in Scotland pay less in taxation than if they lived in other parts of the United Kingdom, and they get access to the social contract which protects people from the rises in the cost of living.
Russell Finlay.
No one is asked to pay more tax. They're forced to pay more tax. This government should get people off benefits and into work, because that's how you improve people's lives. But instead, the SNP hammers workers and businesses to pay for its expensive benefits. And it's going to get even more unfair and even more unaffordable, because an SNP government report wants more people to qualify for ADP, which already accounts for over half of all benefit spending in Scotland. Astonishingly, this report even says that those whose condition is not serious enough to qualify should be paid the benefit. Implementing this report would add another £1 billion to the SNP's already bloated benefits bill. Does John Swinney think that is fair and affordable?
First Minister.
Well, the government's not taken any decisions about these particular issues. But what this exchange highlights, once again, is that Russell Finlay has come into this Parliament to go after disabled people in our country and to undermine their quality of life.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm very pleased to put on the record that while Russell Finlay goes after the benefits of disabled people, my government will stand shoulder to shoulder with disabled people in our society and support them in their journey into employment and into activity. And I would simply point out to Russell Finlay, in relation to the contents of the government's budget yesterday, there is significant support for employability schemes to enable people to access the labour market. That's what I want people to do, to help us to reduce child poverty that's already falling in our society. And of course, Scotland has got significantly lower unemployment under an SNP government than other parts of the United Kingdom. That's because this government delivers for the people of our country.
Russell Finlay.
Doing what he always does, resorting to nonsense smears, and that's because he's in a state of complete and utter denial.
Let's hear Mr. Finlay.
This entire place is in a state of denial. SNP, Greens, Labour, Lib Dem, Reform, they all think that they can keep spending more money in benefits while expecting Scottish workers and businesses to keep paying for it. We can't. We just can't. The Scottish Conservatives know that we must reduce the benefits bill so that we can cut taxes to help people pay for their bills. Yet the SNP's deeply irresponsible budget does absolutely nothing whatsoever to address their benefits time bomb. So John Swinney should be honest for a change. Tell the public which taxes will he raise and which services will he cut to pay for his benefits bill.
First Minister.
If I needed any lessons on how to smear people, I would take them from Russell Finlay, who does it every single week in this chamber.
Thank you.
And as regards the budget yesterday, which of course Russell Finlay couldn't support, there was investment in there for employability schemes to get people off benefits and into employment, which is what he's asking for, but he couldn't even bring himself to vote for the budget yesterday. And Russell Finlay comes here with this empty rhetoric about delivering tax cuts without telling us what services are going to be cut as a consequence. And what I would simply say What I would simply say to Russell Finlay and the Conservatives, to reassure them about the situation we find ourselves in, is that when we as a government asked the credit rating agencies to assess Scotland's position, what did they tell us? They told us that we've got prudent fiscal management here in Scotland. That's what you get with an SNP government.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Families have been searching for answers for years to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital scandal. As everyone in this Parliament now knows, that hospital was opened before it was safe, and children and adults died as a result. John Swinney said the first time the government knew about problems at the hospital was March 2018. But even after that date, the government were denying the scale of the problem. Now, while there has been understandable focus on the lives lost, there were many others harmed. Prophylaxis, powerful anti-infection drugs, are typically used short-term, but for many children at the hospital, they were prescribed for prolonged periods as long as 9 months with side effects. Patients were told this was standard treatment, not connected to the hospital environment. Why were they lied to?
First Minister.
Mr Sarwar raises an important issue about the clinical care for children within the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, and this is one of the material issues that the inquiry that the government has set up under the leadership of Lord Brodie is designed to provide answers to for families. Now, I am not a clinician. I accept that clinical judgments will be made in the care of individuals. But the establishment by this government of the inquiry into the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital is designed to provide those answers to those families, the answers they deserve, and that is why the government set up the inquiry. And I want to make sure that Lord Brodie has every opportunity to provide his answers on that question.
Anna Sarwar.
There has been a group of victims whose story has not been told enough so far. These families believe that their children have been left with lifelong debilitating conditions as a result of prolonged use of these drugs due to infection risks caused by the hospital environment. And I want to share some of these cases today, all of them after March 2018. Anika's daughter Ishal, 9, who wakes up most mornings screaming, clutching her stomach in pain. Karen's son Caleb, 10, who has chronic tummy pains, incontinent issues and struggles to walk. Leanne's son William, 13, who was so sick on these drugs he burned all the enamel off his teeth. Charmaine's daughter 9, Paige 9, who has pain in her limbs and severe stomach issues, so can't go to school. Her parents told me there's a culture of cover-ups and that people were playing God with these children's lives. And I asked the families what they would ask if they were standing here and were facing John Swinney. And Mark, whose daughter Charlie is 14 and has to take regular hormone injections, said simply, I would ask John Swinney, how do you sleep at night?
First Minister.
Sir, I can't give an opinion about the clinical decisions that are offered in individual cases. What I can do is express my sympathy to the families that are involved, recognise their suffering and provide them with the reassurance that the inquiry that the government has established under the leadership of Lord Brodie is designed to capture the evidence and provide the answers to those families. And that is what Lord Brodie has a remit to do, and the government has supported Lord Brodie in the provision of information to ensure that he can undertake that task. And that is what we expect Lord Brodie to do. Now, I will, of course, always listen with care to the perspective and the interests of families who have been affected by the National Health Service and the circumstances that they face, and do all that I possibly can do to address their suffering. And that's the commitment I give to those families.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, all the families whose tragic stories I have shared are here today in the Parliament. And each and every single one of them who are standing right now have spent years having to stand up for themselves and a system that has misled them and treated them appallingly. Cover-ups, secrecy, misdirection and downright deception, with tragic consequences. They all want the truth about what happened to their children, and they want no other family to suffer like they have. Now, John Swinney has twice referenced the public inquiry, but he knows that the public inquiry is not looking at individual cases and therefore cannot give these families the answers that they deserve or that they are looking for. So will he commit today to setting up a genuinely independent expert panel, not connected to the Health Board or the Government, to look at each of these cases on an individual basis, allow each of these families to ask all the questions that they have so they can get the answers they need and, finally, the truth that they deserve?
First Minister.
President Officer, I want families who have suffered to get the truth. That is why the Government has established the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, which it was asked to do by this Parliament. And that is why we have provided all of the information that we have to the inquiry to enable it to undertake its activities. Now, in the course of today, I will be meeting families who have been affected by the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital issues. I will be seeing other families in the course of my diary in the next couple of weeks as well, because I am absolutely committed to making sure that families get the truth. Now, Mr Sarwar asks me to put in place a process which I think, in all honesty, I have to reserve my position on until we get the report from Lord Brodie, because Parliament has asked for a public inquiry to be undertaken, and I cannot, as First Minister, prejudge the outcome of that public inquiry. That is what I think is the rational thing to do. But I will consider the point that Mr Sarwar gives. I give candid answers to Parliament. That's my style as First Minister. It's what I want to do. And what I'm saying to Mr Sarwar is, having established a public inquiry, we have to enable that inquiry to take its course. And that's the approach the Government will take. I will consider his request, and I will, of course, discuss these issues with the families that I meet in the course of my diary in the next few weeks.
Question number 3, Gillian Mackay.
High-quality, affordable childcare should not be a luxury in Scotland, but the current system is not delivering. This week, West Lothian Council voted to cut all funding for cross-boundary placements, meaning parents where I live in Falkirk who are using private nurseries in Linlithgow are set to be hit with a huge unexpected bill. Children who have applied for places will be denied them from the 1st of April and will now have to find alternative childcare at terrifyingly short notice. And children halfway through their current placement will be forced to move in August. This is an unacceptable level of disruption for young children and families who were promised funded childcare. Will the First Minister intervene and help the families who will be impacted by this? And will his government provide an urgent solution to councils cutting funding for cross-boundary childcare?
First Minister.
Well, I have every sympathy with this issue, and I think it gets to the nub of some of the dilemmas that the Government has to wrestle with about the delivery of services by local authorities. Because statutory guidance is clear that families accessing cross-boundary placement should be treated on the same basis as families accessing provision locally. So West Lothian Council is proceeding, a Labour-led council I would point out, proceeding to not follow the statutory guidance that's in place. That's a bit of a salutary warning to all of us about what Labour do when they get into power. And what I want to make sure is that people understand the financial circumstances in West Lothian Council. West Lothian Council will receive an additional 7.8% in its budget compared to 25-26. And this Government is fully funding 1,140 hours of high-quality early learning and childcare. Now, the Government is limited in what it can do because local authorities are self-governing organisations. But I simply point out to Parliament that it would be helpful if West Lothian Council could actually deliver on the commitment that we're all signed up to provide affordable childcare to individuals in Scotland and not put the difficulties that Gillian Mackay is putting in front of me in front of families in West Lothian and in Falkirk.
Gillian Mackay.
The Scottish Greens want to deliver free places for every child in Scotland from 6 months up, but the Scottish Government is not delivering the current commitment on funded childcare once a child turns 3, an issue that we raised with the First Minister ahead of this year's budget. Thanks to Scottish Green councillors, Glasgow is now the only local authority left that offers funded childcare to all children, starting the week after a child turns 3, with many other families having to pay thousands of pounds out of their own pocket whilst they wait for the start of the next school term. The Scottish Government promised free childcare at 3, but they've not funded it, and I appreciate the issues with councils not passing some of that on, but the councils are trying to plug that gap. When will the First Minister come good on his party's promise and make sure childcare in Scotland is really free at 3?
First Minister.
Well, the Government's putting in place around £1 billion a year since 2021 to provide 1,140 hours of funded early learning and childcare to all 3- and 4-year-olds. Now, that's the Government's commitment. We've obviously set out in relation to the budget proposals some other provisions which are about extending some of that early learning and childcare, and the Government will have more to say on this in the coming weeks in relation to some of the other measures we are able to take on the issue of child poverty. But what I would say to Gillian Mackay is that there is adequate funding being put into the local government settlement to deliver on the Government's commitment. This is supposed to be a partnership endeavour, and what doesn't help is when local authorities don't work collaboratively with the Government in delivering the aspirations of this Parliament.
Question number 4, Michelle Thompson.
To ask the First Minister what assessment the Scottish Government has made of warnings from industry leaders that high transmission charges are making wind farms in the north of Scotland uncompetitive, including any implications for its work to grow the renewable energy sector.
First Minister.
President Officer, the current system of transmission charging is wholly unfit for purpose and unfairly penalises Scottish generators, putting them at a commercial disadvantage and reducing their viability. The levers to effect change are reserved to the United Kingdom Government, and we have repeatedly called on them and Ofgem to set out equitable long-term solutions, as well as immediate measures to protect Scottish generators from unfair, high and volatile charges. Furthermore, we have been clear that the views of Scotland's renewable sector must be at the heart of any reforms.
Michelle Thompson.
I thank the First Minister for that response, and he would have noticed that this week Scottish Renewables published a report which set out the damage the Labour Government's transmission charging regime is doing to Scottish generators. Westminster's transmission charging regime is fundamentally unfair and hindering renewable projects in Scotland. And of course, this is whilst Labour's tax on Scotland's energy is destroying around 1,000 jobs a month. Will the First Minister join in calling me on the UK Government to end this discriminatory transmission charging regime for existing projects right now? And does he agree that Scotland needs full control over our energy sector, which of course only Scottish independence can bring?
First Minister.
President Officer, we very much agree that the transmission charging regime is hindering renewable projects in Scotland. It's wholly unfit for purpose and it unfairly penalises Scottish generators. In addition to that, there is vast amounts of renewable energy being produced in Scotland and much more in prospect, but people in Scotland under the current United Kingdom arrangements will not get the benefit of that energy being generated. So I agree very much with Michelle Thompson that if Scotland wants to have lower energy costs for households and businesses, the energy wealth of Scotland must work for the people of Scotland, and that only comes when Scotland will be independent.
Tess White.
Does the First Minister agree with his Energy Secretary that if you don't want pylons, battery storage or other destructive infrastructure in rural Scotland, you are far right? And if not, will he apologise for her disgraceful remarks?
In relation to the substantive question.
Well, I'm interested in Tess White's comment. Obviously, members of the public are free to express their views on all questions. We live in a democracy. All of us live in a democracy, and we're all free to express the point of view that we hold. And what's important is that all of the opportunities for engagement on any issues in relation to renewable projects are available to all members of the public through the planning process, and it will always remain so.
Question number 5, Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I refer members to my entry in the Register of Interest as a practising solicitor. To ask the First Minister, in light of reported renewed calls over the weekend to end the Lord Advocate's dual role, when the Scottish Government will publish its proposals and begin a consultation on separating the prosecution function from the role of providing legal advice to the Scottish ministers.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the law officers operate with integrity and entirely independently of any other person as they undertake their prosecutorial and investigation of deaths functions and provide legal advice to ministers, and separating the functions would require legislation by the United Kingdom Parliament. A draft research paper on the law officers' roles and functions, setting out factual information, context and analysis, was undertaken by the former Chief Executive of the Scottish Law Commission, Malcolm Macmillan. It was subsequently peer-reviewed and will be published before the end of the parliamentary term. While the Scottish Government is considering whether any change might be desirable, it considers that the current position is appropriate.
Liam Kerr.
Well, I'm pleased we finally have a date, but it's extraordinarily late given that Macmillan was appointed over 3 years ago to do this research. First Minister, for the sake of the system's integrity, for public confidence and the clear separation of powers, the Lord Advocate's dual role must be split, as promised in the SNP's 2021 manifesto. Now, the First Minister will be pleased to note that Conservative MP John Cooper has brought a bill in the UK Parliament which would enable the split. So, will the First Minister instruct Stephen Flynn and the SNP MPs to support Cooper's bill, and if it passes, will he immediately take the steps required to split the Lord Advocate's role?
First Minister.
There's quite a number of hypothetical elements to that question. But for me to be able to fulfil what Mr Kerr has asked of me, I've got to win the election and make sure I lead a government after the election. I'm glad that Liam Kerr believes that that's exactly what I'm going to be doing.
Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First of all, can I say, and I hope this is on behalf of the whole Chamber, that any language used by anyone in this place or otherwise that suggests for a second that the Lord Advocate is in any way corrupt pays a huge disservice to the person that holds that role and the independence of the judiciary. And I think that is something we have to put on record as MSPs. But I think the point that Mr Kerr makes is a valid one. This is an issue that has been rumbling along for many years, First Minister. It has been 4 years since Mr Macmillan was tasked with finding a solution to this conundrum. I've always believed that this puts the Lord Advocate in an impossible position and that the dual role should have been taken away many years ago. If that report is published in the coming weeks, is it likely that we will see some action and resolution to this issue before the Scottish parliamentary elections, or is there a risk that this could still yet be kicked into the long grass of the next Parliament, which I don't think benefits anyone in this instance?
First Minister.
Well, the first thing I want to say is I want to welcome the comments that Mr Green has made about the language that's got to be used in Parliament. And I very much welcome what he has said, because in my original answer I indicated that the law officers operate with integrity and entirely independently of any other person. That is what I believe, and as I've put on the record to Parliament last week, the Lord Advocate and the Solicitor General for Completeness carry my complete confidence in being able to exercise those functions on the basis that they have said. And indeed, I noticed yesterday that not all Conservative members support the kind of language that was used by their leader last week at Parliament, and I think that's both encouraging and depressing. Encouraging that members of the Conservative Party don't agree with their leader and the smears that he was putting out last week, and depressing that the leader of the Conservative Party repeated the contemptible rubbish that he said in Parliament last week. Now, in relation to the substantive point that Mr Green puts to me, the issue is about the publication of the research paper, I've committed that that will be undertaken. Mr Green knows that the parliamentary time is limited between now and the election. This is going to be an issue that the next Parliament is going to have to consider, but it will be able to do that with the dispassionate research evidence produced by Malcolm Macmillan that will be available to inform debate. And there has to be thorough and substantial debate on this question, because there are very significant constitutional issues that are raised by this particular point, and that has to be carefully considered by Parliament before it acts. And it obviously requires, as Mr Kerr's question to me highlights, interaction with the United Kingdom Parliament, because this Parliament doesn't have the power to amend the Scotland Act in the fashion that Mr Green's proposal would require it to do.
Question number 6, Mercedes Vialba.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the outcome of the University of Aberdeen UCU ballot, which resulted in 83% of those voting in support of strike action and 90% in favour of action short of strike.
First Minister.
So while ministers cannot intervene directly, I would encourage the University and College Union and the University of Aberdeen to work constructively to seek a resolution to this dispute. I am keen that all parties work together to minimise the risk of disruption for students. My clear expectation is that staff and trade unions are consulted meaningfully on the potential impact of any measures that would have an effect on the university's workforce, in line with the Fair Work principles that are taken forward by the Government.
Mercedes Vialba.
Just 2 years after strike action was averted, thanks to trade union negotiation, UCU members at the University of Aberdeen have voted overwhelmingly in support of industrial action. They voted in defence of their jobs, their workplace and their students' learning conditions. Because over the last 2 years, over 440 jobs at the university have been lost. And elsewhere, the University of Dundee has seen over 500 job losses since July 2024. Strike ballots have been held at Heriot Watt, Strathclyde and Stirling, and a new ballot opened today in Edinburgh. UCU members are having to fight the same battle again and again, up and down the country. I'm pleased to hear the First Minister urging university principals across the country to meet with campus unions. They must listen to their workforce, but what is his government doing to address the financial crisis in our higher education sector?
First Minister.
Well, obviously the Government, I reiterate the points I made earlier on to Mercedes Vialba, that I want to make sure that there is good dialogue between the university leadership and the trade unions to resolve these issues. In relation to the financing of the universities, the Government has increased the resources available to the university sector through the Scottish Budget. We've also increased the budget available for colleges as well. And I welcome the launch of the Framework for Sustainability and Success of Scottish Universities, which will explore options for securing a successful and sustainable future for the world-leading university sector that we benefit from in Scotland, and the Government is fully engaged in that activity.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I share the First Minister's keenness for all parties to get round the table and to resolve this dispute so that the impact on students in Aberdeen is minimised. Universities have received a record sum of funding from the Scottish Government, from the budget yesterday, a budget that Labour did not vote for, of course, and students here receive a much more comprehensive package of support, including paying no tuition fees like they do in England. Can the First Minister confirm that the University of Aberdeen should be supporting students, and could he further set out how students in Scotland are benefiting under the SNP?
In relation to the question, First Minister.
As I indicated in my answers to Mercedes Vialba, I do encourage dialogue to resolve this dispute. The budget demonstrates that the Scottish Government remains firmly committed to the principle that access to higher education should be based on the ability to learn and not the ability to pay. The Government's commitment to free tuition ensures that Scottish students studying in Scotland do not accrue potential additional tuition fee debt of over £28,000 over 3 years owed by their peers in other parts of the United Kingdom. And any of us observing the debate in the rest of the United Kingdom can see the punishing burden of the tuition fee debt that has been carried by individuals in our society. And I'm glad that the leadership and the commitment of the Scottish Government and the SNP Government has made sure that students in Scotland are not carrying that burden.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries. I call Pam Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Crime statistics released on Tuesday are showing sexual crimes up 10%, rape and attempted rape up 12%, domestic abuse up a shocking 25%. Presiding Officer, these figures are a national humiliation and the result of 19 years of the SNP in government and their soft-touch approach to justice. Last month, the First Minister refused to support my Prevention of Domestic Abuse Scotland bill. So, if he thinks my bill was unnecessary, what plans does he have to tackle these despicable statistics? First Minister.
I think it's important that I put some context around the points that have been made by Pam Gossel. Scotland is a safer place since this government came to office. Recorded crime is down 38% since this government came to office in 2006-07, and it has halved since its peak in 1991. So this country is a safer country, but within that data there is a rise in a number of elements of sexual crimes and domestic violence. Now, some of that is to do with the approach that's been taken, as I set out to Parliament last week, by the Lord Advocate, in making sure that significant progress is made on bringing crimes of violence against women and girls to the courts with confidence, with effective prosecutorial strength behind it, to make sure that more and more of these cases are being prosecuted. And I pay tribute to the Lord Advocate for what she has done in that respect. As regards soft touch, well, there are more people serving longer sentences in Scotland because of those decisions of the Lord Advocate to prosecute and secure convictions on these cases. And lastly, I am absolutely committed, and I give the leadership across government to make sure that violence against women and girls is tackled in our country, and that will always be at the heart of the steps of my government.
Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Colleagues may have read this week's Herald article with figures from Public Health Scotland showing that fewer women are attending cervical cancer checks in Scotland. According to Cancer Research UK, mortality rates for cervical and uterine cancer in the UK are 47% higher in the most deprived quintile compared with the least. Percentages and phrases like deprived quintile seem a bit dehumanising. Can I ask what the Scottish Government will do to urgently ensure that all women's health services are accessible to women with the most economic challenges and the most social challenges? And will he join me in amplifying the really important message that even where you've had the vaccination for HPV, you must attend screenings when invited to them?
First Minister.
President Officer, let me begin by saying that Ruth Maguire has, not for the first time, given very powerful advice to Parliament and to members of the public, to women in our society, about the steps that we have to take. I unequivocally reiterate the message that Ruth Maguire has set out to Parliament, and I urge every woman, whether vaccinated or not, to attend their cervical cancer screening. The uptake of screening is not where we want it to be, so let me be open about that with Parliament. There are complex reasons for that, but we must take steps to deliver services differently to make sure that we improve those rates of performance. One of the measures, which will begin this March, is the offering of the first self-sampling tests that will be available, focused in some of the most deprived areas of Scotland. We've also recently provided funding in 3 health boards for patient navigators to directly encourage underscreened individuals to attend screening, and we continue to commit £1 million annually to tackle cancer screening inequalities. And we will be resolute in taking forward those measures. But I am grateful to Ruth Maguire for so powerfully putting this issue on the parliamentary agenda, and I give her the assurance of the commitment of the Health Secretary and I and the Women's Health Minister to make sure that the progress that she demands is delivered in the period to come.
Okay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Over a decade ago, a former SNP First Minister promised to close the poverty-related attainment gap. And 5 years ago, the current First Minister promised a Parliament focused on COVID recovery in our schools. But this week's attainment and initial leaver destination statistics show that he and his government have failed in that task. The gap between those from the most and least deprived backgrounds going on to positive destinations widened compared to the previous year. The gap for those leaving school without 5 or more passes at SCQF level 4 and level 6 also increased compared to both last year in 2018-29, and at all levels the gap for those leaving without one national, higher or advanced higher qualification has widened since 2018-19. So does the First Minister agree that this widening gap does not represent a strong recovery, as his Cabinet Secretary appeared to claim? And does he also accept that after 19 years in charge, his party is nowhere near close to closing the poverty-related attainment gap?
First Minister.
President Officer, I recognise the statistics this week demonstrate that there is further work to be done, but what Mr O'Kane puts on the record, not for the first time, is not a complete demonstration of the picture. Attainment levels are at record highs in literacy and numeracy within Scotland's schools. The poverty-related attainment gap across both primary and secondary literacy and numeracy questions are at record lows in our country, and that's as a consequence of the commitment of the Scottish Government to invest in education. In addition to all of that, there were reduced gaps in last summer's National 5, higher and advanced higher results, falling from in each of those categories as a consequence of the Government's interventions. So I simply say to Mr O'Kane that the Government is focused as part of its agenda in the aftermath of COVID, which has been a hugely disruptive period of our lives in Scotland, to make sure we support families. We do that by reducing child poverty, which we are doing in Scotland, unlike the rest of the United Kingdom. And also, we're putting the resources in the budget to support the closure of the attainment gap. And Mr O'Kane couldn't bring himself yesterday to vote for the Government's budget and actually invest in all of these public services. So we'll not be deflected by the empty rhetoric of Mr O'Kane and his Labour colleagues.
Paul McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Despite the fanfare from the UK Government, Ofgem's latest energy price cap for April will see average energy bills almost £400 higher than what the Labour Party had promised voters. On the Labour Party's watch, energy bills in energy-rich Scotland have soared. This is an inescapable disgrace. Does the FM agree that it's Scotland's energy, and only through a fresh start with independence, can we build a wealthier, fairer Scotland where our natural resources mean lower bills for our people?
First Minister.
So, I don't know if I heard it properly, but I think I heard members of the Labour Party saying in response to Mr McLennan's question from a sedentary position that what Mr McLennan was saying was not the case. Well, let me just prove them wrong. The Labour Government pledged to cut bills by £300, but even with the price cap on April, bills will be £73 higher than at the time of the election. And as I am frequently having to do in this Parliament, of providing members with elementary lessons in arithmetic, 300 add 73 makes £373, which is rounded up to £400. So the Labour Party has failed to deliver its commitment to reduce energy bills for the people of Scotland, and they won't be forgiven for any of that.
Finlay Carson.
Presiding Officer, ambulance technicians in Dumfries and Galloway are being left without meaningful career progressions since the move to a university-only paramedic route, despite warnings that removing internal pathways would harm recruitment, retention and morale. All paramedic training now requires attendance at one of a small number of universities, meaning rural technicians travelling long distances, often several hours, to meet the nearest campus. The requirement to physically attend a university means that technicians in rural areas are left at a significant disadvantage, making worse the challenges already faced by rural and remote ambulance stations. Will the First Minister commit to reinstating a supported internal progression route, including blended or apprentice-style training, so experienced technicians can progress while remaining in employment and rural services are no longer left at a disadvantage? And when will you fix that?
First Minister, always through the chair.
I think Mr Carson makes a reasonable point. No individual, regardless of their geography in the country, should be prevented from developing career progression. So if that's what's happening as a consequence of these changes, then I'll look into that carefully with the Health Secretary. Because if we take, for example, the model of the University of the Highlands and Islands, members of the public, and I saw this intimately when it came to teacher training, for example, members of the public can remain in the communities in which they live, but through the learning environment of the UHI model, they can access initial teacher education, but stay where they are and then where their families are. So models that this can work. We have to look at that for the paramedics. But let me take that point away, and the Health Secretary will consider it, and the Health Secretary will write to Mr Carson about what steps we can take. Jackie Baillie.
The Commission has reported a £450 million gap in funding for social care in 24-25. Fast forward a year and the gap is a staggering £562 million. This is simply not sustainable and is having a devastating effect on vulnerable people and their families. Overnight support is being removed from disabled people. Respite care is being slashed. The care packages for older people are simply not available, leading to a spike in delayed discharge. The First Minister said earlier that he stood with disabled people. Does he not think that's the height of hypocrisy when it is his government that is slashing their care packages?
First Minister.
Well, I find that a very odd point for Jackie Baillie to advance, because her party were trying to remove the voices of disabled people from integrated joint boards, which was a policy commitment of this government. And also, the government is putting in increased resources into the health service, increased resources into local authorities. As a consequence, social care should be effectively funded. And Jackie Baillie couldn't bring herself to vote for the government's budget yesterday. So this is just more posturing, more empty rhetoric, more of the same from the Labour Party that lets the people of Scotland down, including people with disabilities.
Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week, the First Minister set out plans for a further 15 GP walk-in centres across Scotland, rural and urban, including in my region in Stranraer. Meanwhile, waiting times have fallen for 8 months in a row as we start to see our NHS turn a corner. For some unknown reason, the Labour Party oppose GP walk-in centres and want to rip up the GP contract, with Anna Sarwar's half-baked plans being referred to as, and I quote, flailing election hopes on life support. Does the First Minister agree that the Labour Party's opposition to GP walk-in centres shows that they have no ambition for our NHS and are completely out of ideas?
On matters of devolved responsibility, and I would ask members to remember that. And Mr Stephen Kerr, I had not asked you to contribute to this discussion. Please resist the temptation. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, on my responsibilities, I'm very pleased that on my responsibilities there are going to be, we've announced plans for 16 walk-in GP centres, and there were more to come. When I was in Shetland on Tuesday, there was a very warm welcome for the proposals that I've put in place with the announcements there. The announcement in Wester Hailes a few weeks ago was warmly welcomed, and the only people that seem to be disappointed about this government tackling the ATM rush are the Labour Party, because this government offers solutions where the Labour Party offer absolutely nothing. And of course, alongside my other responsibilities, I'm very pleased that for 8 months in a row, long waits are continuing to fall, just as I promised the people of Scotland. So what the public can be assured about is the NHS is safe in the SNP's hands, and the SNP is delivering for the National Health Service in Scotland.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. Our next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Ros McCall, and there will be a short suspension now to allow those leaving the chamber and the public gallery to do so.